IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of All Things Policy, where we discuss policy issues of relevance. Today's topic that we are going to discuss is something to do with the menstrual leave policy. And today I have with me my colleague Mahek, who is a program manager at the policy school at Takshashila. Thank you for joining me, Mahek.
Thanks, Priyal.
Now, before we actually get to the topic in hand, we have a few announcements. So admissions are now open for our 12-week graduate certificate programs in public policy, defense and foreign affairs, and technology and policy. And the last date for applications is on Saturday, the 30th of April, 2022. And the program starts on the 7th of May, 2022. And you can find more details as well as the application forms, everything on school.takshashila.org.in. Now, let's get to the topic at hand. Menstruation as a topic is something that not a lot of people talk about, and there's so much of taboo around it. But this also has led to a lot of women or menstruating people in general hiding their pain and carrying on with their day-to-day life. And that has become so normalized. So this is exactly what Mahek and I want to discuss today. So Mahek, when we talk about menstrual leave policy, right, what exactly are we talking about and what exactly do we want to convey without giving our listeners a wrong idea about it?
Yeah, correct. So before we get into directly what menstrual leaves are, I just want to start by telling people how sick leave came into being. So when all of this industrial revolution was happening and men were the primary workforce, the industry owners realized that people who are working continuously need leave to take care of their body, probably to relax themselves, to chill a lot. And that's how sick leaves were introduced. And that's been a tradition that has been continued for over centuries. But when
Right.
we talk about menstrual leaves, we talk about these leaves being imparted or being given to people who menstruate apart from sick leaves. For example, if I, as an employee, get 14 sick leaves per year, and I menstruate 12 times a year, I need to be given those 12 extra leaves so that I can relax or probably work from home when I'm menstruating. And that's how we talk
Yeah.
about menstrual leave. And it's just so strange that all of the time we have been bringing up these issues, and whenever there are issues related to men, everybody addresses it. But whenever there are issues which are probably related to trans men or women in general, nobody wants to talk about it. And I hope through this podcast of ours, we try to convey the message without probably sounding like as non-workaholic.
Right. And also, I think what is important is that when we say menstrual leave policy, we are not saying you have to, every woman or every menstruating person will strictly take all the leaves, right? It just says that when they are at discomfort, rather than working in that discomfort state, it would be better if they had some sort of a provision where they could either take a day off and or work from home or something like that, some amount of flexibility that gives them the freedom to work at their own pace during that time of the month.
Yeah, I'm correct. And a lot of people, I wanted to highlight that a lot of people say that women can just simply use their sick leaves. But I want to reiterate one point: sick leaves are probably meant for me when I probably have fever, or I have to go undergo some surgery, or what forbid anything else. Menstrual, if I keep on using all my leaves, sick leaves as menstrual leaves, I'm probably be left with nothing for a year when I'm actually sick. And one thing that we
Yeah.
have to talk about is menstruating is not being sick or is not illness, although it comes along with a lot of cramps and body pain and across. With this podcast, we're going to talk about all of those things. But I don't think so. Menstrual needs should be at any point in time be compared to sick leaves or women or people menstruating should be told like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think so the idea of menstrual leave in general is not a very new concept. So from what I know or from what I've read is also that, in nearly 100 years ago, back in the times in the 1920s and 1930s, Soviet Russia relieved menstruating women from paid labor to safeguard their reproductive health. And I think that's where the idea behind the formal menstrual leave policy began. And there have also been countries like Japan and South Korea and everyone where menstrual leaves have become a very formal leave. Though there might be a time where some women might take it, may not take it, but whatever they do exist, right?
Yeah, correct. Like you really highlight like good countries about Japan and South Korea. I also want to point like Asia has been the probably the lighting force and has taken the lead to introduce menstrual leave for people. Like more recently, Taiwan or probably Indonesia and some parts of Singapore. All of these countries have taken the lead and started to introduce menstrual leaves. And I think now it's the right time that India also recognizes the need of if it wants to increase the female labor force participation, then it has to make the environment more comfortable or probably more equitable for women to enter.
Definitely. And I know for a fact that a lot of private companies are kind of starting that trend because I think sometime in 2020, Zomato had introduced a
Yeah.
leave policy for
Yeah.
women who are menstruating because it's a physical labor, right? At the end of the day, they have to deliver the food and all of that. In that case, given such a case, no, having something like this is sort of encouraging women to get into these kind of companies where they take efforts to understand that not a male and female bodies are very different and they have very different physiological needs, and these
Yeah.
kind of things are absolutely necessary.
Correct. And like with Zomato, what also happened, like they've also introduced these menstruating leave for all women in their companies, irrespective of they were probably in a media department or there was some HR department. They introduced it for overall. And before that, I think it was if we go to the government side and move ahead from private organizations. Bihar has introduced menstrual leaves over 30 years before, and it has been
Oh
continuing
my.
that process for now. Yeah, exactly. If Bihar government can do it. And so like there have been examples and the state has taken a lead. I think other states can also start following up now. But if we come back to all these private organizations, there have been a couple of private schools in Kerala which have started the same process. There has been the TP News channel from Kerala again, Matrubhumi, who did introduce the menstrual leave, I think 2 years ago. And some small wet and dry and some startups have also started to do it. So I think now it's the right
Great.
time that when people are talking about it, women are also coming up straight away and like talking about the things that they have to go through and while they're menstruating. I think at organization levels, organizations can start up introducing menstrual leave for their employees.
Definitely. And I think, and it should be, encouraged by people as well as I understand why sometimes a blanket leave cannot be a solution for certain things, but a starting point is definitely required. And the fact that certain state government, like Bihar, for example, as well as certain private organizations taking this route is actually a welcome change for that matter. Now, before
Correct.
we actually go on, yeah, please go ahead.
No, I was saying, I think when organizations at their own levels will try to introduce menstrual needs, I think they're also trying to probably start a conversation regarding periods,
Exactly.
menstruation in
Yeah.
general. Like we know in our country, it's such a neglected, it's such a taboo topic. If you see women at workplaces, they still have to hide their sanitary napkins while going to
Right.
the washroom. I think we still
Yeah.
don't talk about all of these things. And of course, people who don't menstruate don't really get the idea of what
Yeah.
probably a woman has to go through. And I think really you'll have a better idea of why biologically we need leaves while we are menstruating because we are
Right.
going through a couple of things. And so I think with all
Definitely.
of these new organizational level changes, I think we're also going to like probably fasten up the conversation or the conversation around periods and menstruation in general.
Definitely. And before we move on, actually, we are going to take a short break here and we will be right back and we will discuss this topic further in detail. So please stay tuned.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Storytellers and Storysellers, Vineet talks to Tanisha, Shweta, and Ashish. They are the founders of the sex toys and wellness business, the Sangya Project. They recount their journey from an Instagram page to a full-fledged queer-owned business. On The Fighting Goat, Arjun and Somesh take a look at why MMA fighters are choosing to go back to pro wrestling. Want to learn an interesting perspective on the act of letting go? On The Habit Coach, Ashton shares 3 questions that will help you forgive others. On Marathi Kitkitun, the Deshmukhs draw a connection between the disciplines of science and literature. And on Tere Mere Raste, Keshav explores the city of Strawberry Farms, San Diego. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. Also, remember, we're on YouTube. You can check us out on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube and get a list of all the YouTube channels we have active at this point. I'd also like to make a quick note that we're doing a small listener survey, and it would really help us if you could fill that out. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/survey. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance and India Water Portal. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Hello and welcome back to the episode where we are talking about the menstrual leave policy at this point. And we have discussed about what exactly do we mean by menstrual leave policy and what are the different policies for menstrual leave that are around the world and how this is not exactly a new concept, but there are several countries in and around the world, especially in Asia, that have implemented the menstrual leave policy. And there are certain private organizations as well in India that have started implementing it. Now, before we get into the arguments against the menstrual leave, I think what is very important, like Mahek mentioned earlier, is that is biological. We have said this earlier, is that biologically men and women are very different, right? And women experiencing menstrual discomfort at any degree and suffering from illnesses related to menstruation, including dysmenorrhea, endometriosis, ovarian cysts, and mood disorders may benefit from menstrual leave. And the thing is, these cramps and all these symptoms of menstruation often leave women, like they disrupt women's life severely during that time of the month, and it makes them harder to attend their daily day-to-day routine. And there was also, medically speaking, also period cramps are said to be sometimes more painful than heart attacks to certain people. And in some cases, it's equivalent to, pushing during like the pushing stages of labor. Now, although heart attacks cause like very severe pain, the symptoms are often vague with like mild symptoms, which a lot of the people ignore them or think it is something to do with indigestion. And we have to also remember that a significant proportion of women have heart attacks with no pain. But on the other hand, primary dysmenorrhea, which is a scientific term for painful periods, they always hurt. And period pains, now, if I have to go into like the biology of it, they are due to prostaglandins, and these are released temporarily. These are released from the lining of the uterus, and it causes it to squeeze as that process happens. And temporarily, what it also does is it cuts off oxygen supply, resulting in something called as transient ischemia. And this process is one of the most painful biological processes in the body. And when I say that, what I mean is the transient ischemia is one of the most painful biological processes. And the thing is, prostaglandins are also known as something called as the analgesic substances. You must have heard called something called as analgesics, which you take for pain relieving, whereas an analgesic substance heightens the pain, right? So now, simply put, prostaglandins are nothing but a nightmare, and they cause painful uterine contractions and also increase the pain signaling. And if that wasn't enough, they also cause like nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. So like you can see that biologically, when women go through so much of discomfort, having sort of flexibility in terms of for their work and stuff will make their life easier. But continuing with like what Mahek and I were discussing, a lot of people are against menstrual leave and they keep having arguments against it. And there is productivity arguments, there is economic arguments, and there are multiple other arguments. Mahek, can you highlight more about like these arguments that are present?
Yeah, but like I want to also add, like Priyal, you raised a very important point, and I think the gist of it is we'll have to first acknowledge the fact that
Yeah,
men and women bodies are not exactly the same. For
definitely.
that
Yeah,
matter, trans men are also very different from how men and women biologically function. And I think when we are
definitely.
going ahead and we want to make our places probably more inclusive, then we'll have to understand that most of these employees probably go through something every month, and we'll have to take all of these considerations into mind before probably generalizing a lease policy. But coming back to the argument bit, Priyal, I think in a country where menstruation in itself as a topic is seen with raised eyebrows and people don't want to talk about it, then of course it's very obvious that people have
Right.
several arguments against introducing leave policy for it.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think the most basic argument is that what I have heard and like when I've spoken to people regarding menstrual leave is that first, that you're not the only one. Women have been doing it for ages. Women
right.
have been
Yeah,
employed, formally and formally employed since several decades. And I think we are no special, right? And we can probably just have a MEFTAS plus and then go back to work, and that's the spirit.
yeah,
I have many problems with these arguments. The first is we are just normalizing the pain, and we're normalizing the fact that women, okay, just eat probably a MEFTAS plus, pop the pill, and get back to work. If probably climbing up the ladder in a certain way by putting myself through a certain kind of pain, do I really want it? Do I really
yeah,
want to survive in a world which is now still now dominated by men? And the
right.
second of the point is that a lot of people argue against menstrual leave is that, but then probably somebody wants to take a vacation break, or somebody felt sick because of this, and somebody wants to take a smoke break or something else, and all of these things come into picture. And then I want to point out one thing: women or people who menstruate in general did not choose this for
Yeah,
themselves. It's not a choice that we are making. It's a biological fact, and we are okay with it. We don't have a problem with it. What we are
right.
arguing for is just to make the workspace more inclusive, more equitable when you're hiring such people, right? But the
Yes.
second, which brings me to second argument, the other important argument that a lot of people are genuinely concerned about, that if we introduce menstrual leaves, will more employers and more organizations not restrain from hiring more women, right? Because now we know when a newly married woman enters the workspace, the simplest question that she's asked is probably when is she planning to have a child, right? So now it might prevent more women from entering the workspace. I have an answer to that, that men around the world, or probably people around the world, women including, they have found enough reasons to keep women out of workforce, right? We have found enough excuses. We have found enough reasons that women can't do
Right.
this. This is a physically demanding job.
Yeah,
They have
yeah.
to take care of the children. And all of these excuses come into play. This is one additional excuse. And I think Barka that had pointed out a couple of years ago that she does not believe in the idea of menstrual leave because according to her, it's biologically determining a workspace. But according to me, it is not. I think we just try to make the workspace more inclusive, because when we know more
Yeah.
and more women are entering workspaces now and workforce now, and we want more women to join the organizations, we have to make sure that a certain section of people we are hiring are comfortable. We make
Right.
probably timings or workarounds possible for them so that they work full fledgedly and with their whole heart towards the organization.
Also, like what I wanted to say was like when we talk about the discomfort and being able to work comfortably, there has been statistics to show that a lot of women during their work are putting through this discomfort and their painful periods and all of that just so that just because they're so scared of telling people that this is something that their body is going through and stuff like that, right? And by
Yeah,
introducing
correct.
such a policy, it sort of, we're talking more about equity here, right? So having this is important.
Mhm. Yeah, correct. And a lot of people also state that menstrual leaves will hinder the business and probably can be economically harmful. And a lot of employers also have that question. So the thing is, according to me, menstrual leave policies might not make immediate sense or might not make the most apparent sense right now. But I think in longer term, it will. We know that employer dissatisfaction is a huge thing. And in the case of people who
Yeah.
menstruate, usually
Right.
effects will not show right in the front, but their commitment towards the work, probably how hardworking we like they do their outputs and all of those things. I think menstrual leaves can be one additional way how to boost people's and employees' faith and towards the organization, and probably we can see that the productivity also increases at work because at that point in time, personally, I can't work. I probably profusely sweat.
Right.
I have cramps. I can't work, and so I think my productivity is, of course, going down on those 2 days.
Yeah.
If I get that break, I think I'll probably take the rest that my body needs.
Yeah, and you're on a like a double-sided thing, na? One side you're working through the cramps, so there is a guilt that you're not putting your 100% at work, but you're not able to put your 100% of work because you're dealing with cramps, and there's so many other things that go on during menstruation that a lot of people can't explain. So if you get that a day or two of a break, you can rest your body and then get back to your full potential.
Correct. And like also these kind of policies, which also portray towards a larger market that you as an organization care about your employees. You as an organization are more than happy to welcome policy changes which make your employees more satisfied with their work.
Definitely. And I think that is one of the things that draws potential employees to your organization as well, because they see how inclusive you are. They see that you understand. They see that there is a very relaxed approach to work. And that's what motivates them to apply to your organization as well. And I think that is important, right? It brings your organization to a bigger light or better light. So now that we've discussed all the problems and all the arguments and why is it necessary, Mahek, can you think of certain recommendations that we could sort of provide to if there are certain organizations that are listening to a podcast or something? Because at the end of the day, what we want to bring about is a change in the thought process and more inclusivity. So what do you think?
I think a blanket policy on a national level might not be the best case scenario right now in India, especially because we know the status of formal and informal sectors and all of these things. And I think even I think it was 5 years ago, Ninong, airing a member of parliament in Lok Sabha from Arunachal Pradesh, introduced the menstruation benefit bill and to provide women with the both in public and private sectors for 2 days of paid menstruation leave each month. And of course, the bill raised some discussions and it wasn't passed in the end. But I think I would still reiterate the point that I don't think so on a national level it can be possible because of the formal and informal sectors. And I think, but organizations at their own level should start doing and introducing menstrual leave, like a lot of organizations have now started. For example, Zomato, Matrimony, Wet and Dry, and like of course Bihar government on a public sector level. And I think these this introduction of menstrual leave will help in two things. First of all, the first good positive consequence will be it will definitely initiate healthier and more progressive discussions about menstruation, right? We still know that there are a lot of remarks when probably I get angry and probably a male counterpart had asked me about
Yeah,
if I'm on those if I'm on those days, right? And I think these
right.
all of these kind of policies will probably initiate all those healthier discussions and probably will try to shift the mindset. And I
Right.
think the second positive consequence would be like we'll create the workspaces which are not discriminating, of course, on the
Yeah.
basis of gender, but surely are more inclusive and probably are more promising and like it's more open for a larger public than and we're not restricting and it's more safer for women and trans men to join. So I think
Definitely.
at the present, most organizations, both private and public, which can introduce menstrual leave should go ahead and start introducing. Of course, they will be met with a lot of eyebrows and people will have arguments against it, both internally and externally.
What kind of change has ever been, not,
Easy.
yeah, yeah. There has not been a change that has not been brought about unless without people like raising their eyebrows and protesting against it, right? But I agree with what you said. Like a blanket policy will definitely is not the right way to go about it. But I also feel like, because like you said, right, there are organizations that can introduce it, will introduce, that is good. Because if a significant amount of private organizations or whatever public organizations that are able to bring about this policy can bring it about, that could potentially lead to a lot of other people picking it up, and that could in probably lead to like a nationwide policy or something, but that is still a long way to go. And also, when I think constantly I feel like we need to reiterate is that when we say menstrual leave policy, it's not that every woman or every menstruating person takes 2 days off just to chill. It is not that. It's genuinely to
Yeah,
heal their
it's not
body,
holiday.
to deal. Yeah, it's not a holiday. And the reason we're talking about it is because, like, in the very beginning, Mahek mentioned that, if I'm given 14 days of leave and then my 12 days in a year goes in just dealing with my menstrual cramps, then I essentially 2 more days off. And if I fall sick in that period, and then what do I do with that, right? So I think the discussions need to happen in these kind of way. And we're talking more in terms of equity, right? In the sense that
Yeah,
we,
and Priyal, I
yeah,
would want to add one more point here. I think most women also need to understand that, first of all, my threshold of bearing pain will be very different from your threshold of bearing pain. I
definitely,
might have
yeah,
very low threshold, right? And second of
right,
all, you probably can experience more cramps or severe cramps or probably nausea or other things than I do. I
yeah,
think it's not the same for everyone, like how like every menstruation is different depending on the person, right? It's not the
definitely,
same throughout. I might be going through PCOS, you might not. All of these
definitely,
things
yeah.
come into play, and I think that's why it's necessary to make the workspaces more inclusive for all women and trans men to
Yeah,
enter.
and also I think, like, see, for certain women, a lot of times the cycle may not be painful, right? But then there are certain months where the pain is unbearable. During that time, also they will
Correct.
have to. So it's not like every woman goes through the same level of pain every month. The level of the pain also varies per month, and the pain varies between different individuals. So in that sort of a thing, I think having, like Mahek mentioned, having a blanket policy would definitely not work. But if more and more organizations bring up this conversation, have healthy discussions around it, understand that one of the biggest ways to do this is to destigmatize the conversation around menstruation, so that women and menstruating people in general can directly go and take a day off without having to explain why exactly they're doing. Because sometimes,
Yeah.
because of this taboo of conversation, a lot of women don't even want to tell their superiors that they want to take a day off because of their menstruation pain. So having a conversation is extremely important. Making your colleagues and your female colleagues feel comfortable is also very important.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah,
not only women should talk about it, I think it's employers also who actually hire people
yeah,
at the end of the day should start telling us these discussions, even if they're not agreeing for it right now. I think they should engage in the
definitely,
discussion so that they hear both the sides and then probably take the call about it. And more men
definitely.
should also participate in these discussions so that
The
they also
discussion.
understand
Hmm.
and then take a call about it.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's definitely there. So, thank you so much, Mahek, for joining me in this conversation. This was
My
extremely
pleasure.
informative, and it was nice to discuss something like this with you. And I hope our listeners also gained something from this conversation. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Goodbye and see you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
इन्फ्लेशन, फिस्कल डेफिसिट, जीडीपी, एमएसपी, एनपीए, इक्विटी मार्केट वगैरह वगैरह। दोस्तों, हमने ये सारे शब्द टीवी या अखबार में जरूर देखे होंगे या फिर सुने होंगे, पर हम में से कितने लोग हैं जो ये जानते हैं कि इन सब का सीधा प्रभाव पड़ता है हमारी सैलरी पर, हमारे इंक्रीमेंट पर और कमबख्त हमारे खर्चों पर। दोस्तों, मेरा नाम है अभिनव त्रिवेदी और मैं बात कर रहा हूँ इक्का दुक्का इकोनॉमी पॉडकास्ट से, जहाँ पे इस तरह के इकोनॉमिक और फाइनेंशियल टर्म्स को मैं जोड़ूंगा सीधा आपकी जेब से। हर मंगलवार एक नया एपिसोड सुने IVM पॉडकास्ट की वेबसाइट, ऐप या फिर किसी भी अन्य पॉडकास्ट प्लेटफॉर्म पर।
A wise man once said, traveling, it makes you speechless, then turns you into a storyteller.
Well, listen to such travel stories and experiences exploring India on the Musafir Stories with us, Saif and Faiza.
Catch us on the IVM website, app, or wherever you get your podcasts from.